So in this tutorial, we're going to be using this Mountain Bluebird cheat sheet. We're going to be drawing both the perched bird on the right and the flying bird on the left. So get your cheat sheet ready and a pencil and paper, and let's get going. We're just going to look at the bird first. I always recommend the longer you can look at something beforehand, the better. So you're really looking at the size of the head and the body, all those shapes like I mentioned before, those triangles, the wing, the tail area. The legs, how they're parallel, and then there's branch. So I like to look at all of those first, and then I'll start sketching. And again, I'll be really, really light. So you might not even be able to see this yet, but that's okay. I want you to draw as lightly as you can, just have feather-like touch. And don't worry, it's going to get darker in a minute. But you can see how that looks. So just going super light, so you're not getting married to any one line, and you're ground truthing. So I use that pencil as a measuring tool. I'll put that up to my animal, or even if it's in the field, I can use that to look at lengths and widths. And so you can see how narrow I made the head in the first place. So we're not getting married to any one line, just like we don't get married to somebody on the first date or even after the 100th date sometimes. So we're just going to look at these lines and ground truth. So that's why I'm staying really light. And as I get more confident about my lines, I'm going to get a little darker. Sometimes I'll use my finger, like I am with my left finger, kind of pointing at where I'm at to keep track. Just getting that belly, and now looking at the shape of that wing, that really long wing. Remember, they have those really long primaries. Again, always double checking. Now, this, of course, is when we're drawing exactly the same size. It's a little bit harder and a better challenge to draw something larger and smaller than real life. Okay, great. Mary says, I'm taking the paid course. Yes, good. We'll get that up there soon. So I'm just getting the silhouette first, and then later we'll get the anatomy of the wing, but we just, want to get the foundation first, as if you're building a house. So like I often tell the story about my father, who was, he built houses. He was both an architect and a builder, and he'd pour the concrete foundation first, right, before he built the walls. And that's like this, just getting everything really light first. And so that's why I just go a little bit everywhere first to place everything. And then I'll go back and get some more accurate details starting at the top again. So here I'm just kind of finishing up those legs with just those little balls to suggest the foot. And again, just going to double check one more time. You can never do that too often. And then once I feel like I'm kind of close, then I'll start to darken my lines. So the main problem with people when they're drawing is they'll just commit too quickly, and they'll draw too heavily, push too much. So now you see is the very first time I've done any erasing. And I'm just going to get rid of those first kind of try lines, as they call them. So it's a little bit cleaner to start working on my more finished outline. So now again, going to go back, starting at the top again, and this time just looking more carefully, getting a little bit more confident and darker with my lines. The bill, you might not be able to see it in the photo here, but bills do go inside of the head. They don't just stop with a little triangle coming out. So that's what I drew. And sorry. Then looking at that eye, they don't, these bluebirds don't have quite as large of an eye compared to their head as the other thrushes do, you might notice. Again, just really double checking where that eye is, how big that bill is, never being afraid to modify our lines. We're not married to any of these lines. Oops, there we go. Wait, let me get rid of that. Sorry. Now getting a little darker and more confident. So I'm pressing down just a little bit more. Again, we're just working pretty much on our silhouette. And then we're going to be working on the interior a bit more. And just doing a little tiny bit of erasing. Oh, hi, Monica. You're late, but you're here. Okay, well, definitely come back for the replay. So now we're sketching our bluebird here, as you can see. Okay, looking at those legs again. I've got the angle a little bit off on the leg, but that's okay. And there's a lot to know about the feet of birds, and but you know, we don't have time for that today. But basically, there's one foot that goes back, and then the three that go in the front, and then they have the claws. And you can see really how big those claws are. And that's something I want to mention is often we will draw things in proportion to how important we think they are. So often we'll draw like heads and eyes too large, like when kids are drawing a little a face. You know, they'll make really big eyes and then they won't give them any forehead. So in this case, you know, I'm really noticing that those claws are quite long. Whereas if I didn't, I might just assume that they were smaller and think they're not that important and draw them smaller. So anyway, be careful about drawing things that are too large or too small compared to how important of an anatomy they think they are. Okay, now we are going to look at the wing, and hopefully that little video before telling you about the parts of the wing helped a bit. So the idea is I first try to just get those basic parts down and then put the feathers in within each part. So I'm just getting mainly the outline of the bluebird's left wing, and then the parts. Let's see. Oh, I'm adding the tail there. Just kind of got sidetracked here. Oh, making sure I got the tail in the right place and that hind wing. Okay. So now I'm going to go back to look at the parts of that wing. And I usually like to start at the top of the bird. So we're going to do the scapulars, which are the light, feathery, fluffy feathers that are on the whole back. They're not flight feathers. They're just warmth feathers. And then that next group, those are the some of the coverts, and those cover the primaries and secondaries. Well, those, and then I'm looking at the alula. So those are 3 feathers of the thumb. And then I'm drawing the primary coverts, which cover the group of primary flight feathers. And there's a tiny little one sticking out there that I added, that white-edged black one. And then got the secondaries, a pile of secondaries, and just gonna make that rectangle kind of area for those. And those come right out from the base of the primary coverts. And then we're looking at the tertials, those 3 shorter feathers that integrate with the secondaries. And just kind of the edges of the primaries on the left and now the right wing. Just again, stand super loose. We're going to add the individual feathers in a minute. Okay, so now we're going to start drawing each one, and we'll notice that each feather overlaps in that same way that I talked about how tail feathers overlap. Starting at the top of the bird, each feather goes under, as if it was the roof, shingles of a roof. So I'll usually draw them that way, starting at the top. And I'm not really being really particular and counting the numbers or anything. Again, I'm trying to teach people how to do field sketching. So I'm probably being a lot more particular than I would in the field, but I'm trying to teach you some things about drawing. Okay. And then, yeah, then looking at the tertials, those are those 3 feathers that graduate in size. And some people consider the tertials part of the secondaries, but just obvious that they're a little bit different size. And then I'm just going to draw the other tertials there. So once you see these structures, these piles of related feathers, you can make some sense out of all of them, and it really helps. Okay, now I'm just going to add a few lines, kind of symbolic lines for the secondaries, not counting them. Now the primaries, going to look at how they're graduated. So there's, I believe, 9 or 10 of those. So I'm going to look at just where each one sort of starts and then goes up. Each individual one, and it really helps for me to keep my finger on them to keep track. I really lose track of which is which. And just gonna kind of count those because those are pretty obvious. You can see those, and they're white edged, thankfully, so you can see them pretty well, except those last few I'm drawing. And then just going to add that line there. Just really, really subtle, kind of soft, not that accurate. And now what? Yeah, looking at the back, the right wing, we just mainly see, again, the primary feathers overlapped, and they're actually behind the tail. They're kind of hanging down behind the tail. And again, using my left hand, my finger to kind of point to help me keep track a bit. I would probably do this a lot more accurately if I was on my own, but just kind of demonstrating this for you quickly here. And then looking at the tail, I'm going to draw a little bit of those tail coverts, which are those really soft feathers that cover the tail. And then remember, there's 12 feathers. They're in 2 piles, but we're not going to, get too detailed with that. We're just going to kind of draw what we see, basically some overlapping piles of feathers. Not getting too detailed because we're running out of time anyway. And am I going to add any more there? Oh, yeah, a little bit more to the bill. Because again, the size and shape and width of the bill is really important when you're identifying and drawing birds. And so you want to have that pretty accurate. And then, the eye, it's nice to put some time into the eye because the eyes are the windows of the soul. So gonna do that. And then I'm just gonna strengthen my outer line a bit. Just again, get a little bit more confident. A little bit of erasing here, just double checking one more time. So an outline silhouette like this is just the beginning. If you wanted to later, you would be adding some shadows or adding some color with colored pencil or watercolor, depending on your purpose. But often in the field, this is just about the farthest I get. Now, those chest feathers are really kind of long and fluffy and unorganized. So I was just kind of given that idea there. Strengthening the leg just a bit, putting some feathers over it, getting more confident with those toes. There's 3 going forward that we don't see in front, and then the one going back. Again, making sure to draw those claws large enough. You really use those claws for lots of things. So again, just getting a little bit more details here. Just kind of double checking, strengthening a bit. Those coverts there, those are the secondary coverts. And the alula and the primary coverts. Again, each one overlaps the other like a shingles of a roof. Then the tertials. So the more birds you can look at, especially if you just stick with songbirds, because other groups of birds are really different, like ducks look really different than this. Hawks look different. So most songbirds kind of have a similar look to those groups of feathers. So if you study those, look at photographs, it'll really help you to see those structures. Okay. And just strengthening that bottom feather. I'm just using this yellow mechanical pencil. Some people tease me about these, but I really like them because they're thicker than some other pencils than like this. So they're easier to hold for me. But they work great in the field. I love mechanical pencils because you don't have to erase them. And they do come in different leads, and some leads break more easily than others. So you just want to practice. So just finishing the outline of this guy up, just a little bit more of those upper tail coverts, and then a little bit more definition on the tail there. And trying to make this eye look a little bit more alive, just a little bit of a highlight in the eye. You can usually see in a bird. Or there we go. Okay. And just a little bit of shadows there. Of course, we could go on and on. Oh, hi from Tanzania. Cool. So again, this is just the very beginning outline of a bird, just for practice. And yeah, so there we go. I think we're just about done. Okay. Again, with the flying one, it seems a little harder, but if you just use those same concepts of angles and alignments and blocking in, and last week we practiced drawing things upside down, which actually helps in a way. So here I am again. I'm just kind of thinking to myself, looking at the parts of the bird before I get started. And I always start with a core shape. So again, I'm going to start with his oval shaped body before I build the other parts on top. And again, looking at the width of that main body and the length of it. You see that head is just kind of part of the body. You feel like you'd want to draw a little circle for the head, but it really is just part of that same curve that goes from the body. So again, just like that foundation, we're building the foundation before we add anything else to the wings and the tail or anything. We're just going to get that foundation down. And I stay really light because some of my lines might be a little off, like this line is off, but you can see that's why I start really light, and I'm just going to fix it as I go. Just going to get a little bit everywhere. Again, double checking with my pencil. And that's why it's always easiest to draw something the very same size when you're first learning how to draw. It's a little harder to draw something larger or smaller, and that's a great challenge for you to try. Here you can see that the tail is really obviously in these two piles. So songbirds have 12 tail feathers, and they're usually sort of in two piles of 6. And this is really obvious in this case, how they separate it out. I'm just cleaning things up a little bit here, because I don't want to build the wings and the tail too much on the body before I'm pretty sure about the body. And again, just double checking. I try to go as many places as I can to look at lengths and widths and heights, all that stuff. Looking at the width of that wing, that left wing. Lots of ground truthing here. And a little bit of erasing here and there. So that's why I stay really light. I would draw lighter at this point for myself, but I'm drawing a little bit darker than you should so that you can see it on the screen. But I really encourage you to stay just so light that you can barely see your first lines, and then you won't worry so much about erasing things. Here I'm lining up where that end of that primary is compared to the tail. And again, widths. See how much longer I made it. And so it's kind of foreshortened, but I want to make it a lot longer than it is. So that's why it's so important to double check your lines, ground truthing. And that pile of primaries, and then that pile of secondaries and the tertials. So just getting those two areas. Oh, and here I'm off again. So it's just so important to ground truth, and that's why you stay super light. And that's the shoulder. I'm fixing that a bit. And I'm going to shorten that pile of secondaries a bit. So your eyes can really fool you. Your eyes and your mind, maybe it's more your mind, can really fool you. And that's why you want to look. And here is a good example of looking at negative shapes. There's that really narrow triangle behind the wing there. And I still don't have it quite right, but we'll get to it when we add those tertials. How do you get the shapes in the field when the bird is flying by so quickly? Right. Well, it takes a lot of practice, practicing with photographs like this, and practicing with taxidermied specimens, practicing with webcam videos. And of course, the more you know about a particular bird or species, a species of bird, the more you'll know how it would look when it's flying. So yeah, there's other problems here in terms of having foreshortening that adds to the issues. Here I noticed I had that way too narrow. And so again, I'm just fattening that up before I get any more details. And then I'm going to look at that bird's right wing. Again, the basic piles of feathers, those basic piles of primaries and secondaries. Staying light and loose, double checking, always double checking. Of course, this is easier to do with a photograph than in real life, but these are the kinds of things that are good to practice when you're learning to draw. I need to add his shoulder there. I didn't have that shoulder curve good enough. So you see how I just go over things again and again, and I just get a little bit darker each time, just checking things out. And I still think I'm a little pinched in the tail. I think I might fix that later. I can't remember, but the tail does still look funny. Okay, so now just kind of double checking these areas before I get any farther. And then going to start getting a little bit more firm with the body. You see that bill of the bluebird is much more tiny and needle-like for being able to quickly capture flying insects compared to the other more true thrushes that are just picking still insects or worms from the ground. So getting that needle-like bill, again, the shape of a bill is super important when you're drawing a bird to make sure because that can really change among families and even within families. Adding those coverts, the little feathers that cover the base of the tail. And look at those two piles of feathers. Thank you, Susan. Now, again, those feathers overlap from the middle of the bird down. So I'm just kind of adding those feathers, even though I don't see them very well on this photo. If I biologically know that that's how the anatomy is, it helps a bit. Because feathers are tough because they're a little bit transparent. So when they're overlapping, it's kind of hard to tell what's on top and what's not. But if you know the concepts that the innermost tail feathers are on top and they overlap underneath as they go out, it makes it easier. Okay, so now I'm going to look at that left wing. And again, we're trying to remember those different piles of feathers. that have different functions and different shapes to them. So looking at those scapulars first, those ones in the back, the alula, the primaries and secondary coverts, the primaries and the secondaries and the tertials. So again, just kind of thinking about those, looking at those. So we'll add those scapulars first, those kind of short feathers that are on the back and that cover the base of the wing near the shoulder. Looking at those pile of feathers of the alula. Those are 3 feathers usually that are attached to the bird's thumb fingers, thumb bones. And you can't always see all 3 of them, so I just added those. Now I'm looking at the secondary coverts. There's actually a few piles of those, but the main ones are there. And going to just... They're kind of messy because he's flying. You don't want to get it too exact. You know, if you draw every single feather exactly what it might look like in a stuffed specimen, your bird's going to look really fake. So you can just, you know, be a little bit messy if you want. Now I'm adding the area of the primary coverts, those feathers that cover the primaries. And again, the idea that they overlap from the inside of the bird going out. So I wasn't counting them or anything, just kind of getting close. Now looking at the 3 piles of flight feathers. And yeah, I'm going to go from the inside of the bird out because that's how they're overlapping. So looking at that group of secondaries, and they come right to where the primary and secondary coverts connect at the top. Anyway, adding those tertials, which are those 3 feathers that are graduated in size, and then gonna add those. Usually there's the 3 tertials and 9 secondaries, I believe. So something like that. Then the primaries, and you can see there's 4 of them that are a bit longer and a little bit thinner because they have these what's called notches and emargination on them, which I talk about eventually more in my course. Not quite done with the course, that's why it's on sale. But we're going to add that later. But anyway, looking now at those feathers and seeing that those last 4 are longer and thinner at their base. They help to kind of catch the wind and have the bird be more acrobatic. I'm just kind of double checking, counting, but I think there needed another one. Okay, so now just making that line. It's not exact, but it's good enough for government work, as we said when I used to work for the government. So there we go. That's kind of close. Those primaries need to be fixed a bit. They're not quite the right shape. So again, the lighter you stay, the better, less erasing you'll have to do. So yeah, you're not going to be able to see this kind of thing in a flying bird as much, but drawing from photographs really helps you to understand the concepts. Okay, so now going on to the right feather, and it's really, or the right wing is quite foreshortened, so it's going to look pretty different, but now that we understand those basic parts, we're going to look at the alula, those 3 feathers, although only a couple of them are showing. And the secondary coverts, covering the secondary feathers. Noticing how they overlap. Again, the ones closest to the birds are always on top. And then I like to add one over another, under. And then the primary coverts. Well, see, the more you talk about this and practice it, the easier it gets, these terms. Again, I would just practice with songbirds first because other groups of birds look really different, like hawks and ducks and grouse, ground birds, turkey family. They look really different. So it's good to just get the idea of a songbird in your mind first before you start going any more details. So then we have the secondary group. Getting those 3 tertials, 3 graduated feathers. I think I made them too long. Now I'm trying to get too particular here. And again, I could do a better job, more accurate if I was going slower, but this is just kind of a demo for you guys. I'm sure you'll probably do a much better job, especially if you watch this tutorial again. Try it again on your own, even with the sound turned down, so I'm not talking to you the whole time. And just try it again. I didn't like those lines. Oh, I had them angled wrong, right? So sometimes when you start doing a repetitive movement, like if you're drawing sunflowers or pine cones and there's a lot of repetitive lines, sometimes it's easy for your brain to get switched over to symbolism and not really looking at your subject. And that's what had happened there. Okay, so now we're looking at these primaries and noticing again that there's that group that's kind of shorter and more squared off. And then how the last 4 are longer and they're narrower because of the margination and the notch that makes them narrow at the end so they can catch the wind. And again, you can see how the wings are kind of transparent, and those, especially those feathers of those first flight feathers, the primaries, they're overlapping, and so it's kind of hard to tell what's on top. But again, if you understand the concepts, basic anatomical concepts, you'll know how to draw it better. Okay, so now that I got all the parts, I'm just going to go over it again and just a little bit darker and add a little bit more. Here, we're basically, again, just doing these silhouettes and these basic groups of flight feathers. You learn about flight feathers. But, I would probably add a lot more detail if I was doing this as a studio painting, for a client or something. And in the field, I would probably have a lot less detail. So it's kind of a medium, just enough detail to help you learn these parts. And so now I'm just firming up the lines, just looking around the whole bird and getting a little bit more confident, a little bit darker with each of those lines. Going back over the right wing and emphasizing those secondary feathers. And then the group of primary feathers. And again, noticing how those last 4 primaries are longer and narrower at the tips. So we're just about done here with this basically silhouette of the bird, and just going to go over it a little bit more. Just looking around one more time. Fixing that bill a bit, a little too long. And that's it. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on sketching a mountain bluebird. Okay, until next time, see you later. Bye-bye.